Welcome back, everybody, for another episode of Mondays with Mundy. That's me, Jim Mundy, the historian for the Union League Legacy Foundation. You're watching this at the very beginning on August the 9th, so we're back in the Union League Clubhouse, specifically the Banquet Room. And the Banquet Room is located in what we call the Broad Street building, that great brick and brownstone iconic building on South Broad Street. The building itself opened on May the 11th of 1865. So you'll notice that the room is full of American presidential portrait collections. So we're here today to talk about the collection, about the presidents, but about why they're all in this room together. So let's see if this story makes any sense. So the League itself was organized as a patriotic society, December 27th of 1862. Its purpose was to suppress the rebellion, uphold the Constitution, and support Abraham Lincoln. But the League itself was not a political organization. It didn't pick political sides, really until the end of the 19th century. Although I think it's more than fair to say that the League was in spirit a very Republican club, because after all, we were here to support Abraham Lincoln. But nonetheless, so here we are at the Union League. It's 1862 in the city of Philadelphia itself. Now, Philadelphia, let's talk Republicans, since we're talking politics. Now, the city of Philadelphia elected its first Republican mayor in 1860. His name was Alexander Henry. He had already been elected in 1858 as a People's Party mayor. It was a coalition party. Republicans weren't that strong yet in Philadelphia because the party itself was only begun in 1854. But in 1860, Henry was elected as a Republican mayor, which means Philadelphia is going to become this country's major and largest Republican city. We would elect Republican mayors between 1860 and 1952, with only two exceptions in the 1880s, and that was because the Republican Party split its own ticket at the mayor's office, but kept all the other offices in the city itself. So at the same time that this is happening, Philadelphia is this country's major industrial city, all right? By the end of the 19th century, it would be known as the workshop of the world. It had the most diversified manufacturing-based city of any city in America. And the League, from its very beginning, was the home in the 19th century of the industrial elite of Philadelphia. That is, this was the club of the men who owned and ran and operated this blue-collar manufacturing city, known as the workshop of the world. Guess what party they belonged to? They were Republican. And why is that? Well, because the Republican Party adopted the political theories of a founding member of the League named Henry Charles Carey. Now, Carey was the son of Matthew Carey, who was a political Irish immigrant to Philadelphia in 1795. And Matthew Carey created one of the country's largest publishing houses in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. So Charles grew up in the business himself. But after he retired in 1835, he devoted himself to political economy, right? And he would eventually become America's leading political economist in the 19th century itself. Between 1837 and 1840, he publishes his 4-volume treatise on the theory of political economy, followed in 1851 by another book called The Harmony of Interests, Agriculture, Manufacturing, and Commercial. Now, there were lots of political economists in the 19th century, but what made Carey's view so different and interesting was the fact that even though he began his thinking as a laissez-faire free trader, he swiftly changed to believing in a protective tariff. Because here's America in the first half of the 19th century trying to compete on an economic playing field with older, stronger, more wealthy European countries, and we just couldn't do it. So Carey firmly believed that it was important for the government to intervene with a protective tariff to help the smaller guys, like the United States, compete on the larger international stage with the Western European powers. So it was in, shall we say, Philadelphia's economic self-interest as a manufacturing city to become a Republican city. And geez, the League, as it evolved in the 19th century, and its members were the industrial elite of Philadelphia, then it was in the League's economic self-interest, if you will say, to become Republican as well. Now, what else happened in the 19th century to make this all happen? Very simply, in 1860, we elected our first Republican president, Abraham Lincoln. And from 1860 to 1932, there would be only two Democratic presidents, Grover Cleveland and Woodrow Wilson. So the country itself is becoming Republican at the same time. So, in effect, in the 19th century and early 20th century, it became mandatory then for these Republican presidents who relied on Philadelphia and the state of Pennsylvania for their electoral college votes. So these presidents had to come to Philadelphia and they had to come to the League. And this room, the banquet room, is the place where there would have been a reception or dinner when they came to the League House itself. And hence, we have turned this room into our American presidential portrait gallery. So let's take a walk around the room, shall we, and see who we can see. And see if you can guess who we're looking at before I tell you who we're looking at, okay, and see if that actually works. All right, so over my shoulder, we have a wall with 10 portraits on it, great portraits. 5 of the portraits predate the Civil War, so they predate the League itself, but 5 post-date the Civil War. So we have U.S. Grant and Abraham Lincoln, and then on the far right, on the bottom row, Rutherford B. Hayes. Top row, middle, James Garfield, right? Chester Arthur, right? So that's 5 19th century presidents. Now, actually up until 2008, there had been 15 American presidents who visited a League clubhouse. The first was Abraham Lincoln on June the 16th of 1864 when he visited the first clubhouse at 1118 Chestnut Street. Grant would become the first president to visit this clubhouse. And he was here many, many times because the League was probably the biggest Grant fan club in the country and nominated him for president actually 3 times, not just twice, but 3 times, even though Grant declined to run for the 3rd time. So let's walk around the room and see who we can see. So we've seen Lincoln, we've seen Grant, we've seen Rutherford B. Hayes, up top, Garfield. Garfield was one of the 14 presidents who have been in this building, all right? Chester Arthur was scheduled to come to the League House, but for some reason had to postpone his visit and never made it back to Philadelphia to visit the League House itself. Now, behind me, again, you'll see a portrait of U.S. Grant. That's 2 in this room. And again, it reinforces the fact that Grant was absolutely the League members' fan favorite. We have, believe it or not, 3 portraits of Grant and only 2 of Abraham Lincoln. So now you believe it, right? And in the far right-hand corner, we have William Howard Taft. Now, again, Taft was also a big Union League favorite and supported by the League when he ran in 1912 versus Woodrow Wilson. Regretfully, he lost that election itself. And then over here, we have William McKinley, who I think was probably the most popular Republican president after Lincoln. And although keep in mind, Lincoln wasn't popular until after he was assassinated. And unfortunately, the same thing happened to McKinley. So if you look at this portrait, you'll see that his face is very gray and almost death-like. And that's because McKinley was assassinated on September the 12th of 1901 at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York. And this portrait was painted posthumously. But if you also look at its size, that gives you some idea of how much the League respected and esteemed William McKinley. And let's walk over here and see some more of our paintings. Calvin Coolidge came to the Union League in 1927 to receive the gold medal. And he came with his entire cabinet and their spouses. Great party, from what I understand. Theodore Roosevelt was here 4 or 5 times, said it was his favorite clubhouse in the country, loved coming to the Union League of Philadelphia, and why not? It supported him wholeheartedly up until 1912. Okay? Although even then it was a split, believe me. It wasn't an easy decision for the League to make. Herbert Hoover, portrait commissioned by the Union League. Hoover agreed to have his portrait painted only if he could keep working while he was being painted. So what they did is that they put a small dais in the Oval Office, put a chair on it, and Hoover sat in that chair conducting the affairs of state. Hence, Pylades Costa, the artist, had Hoover with papers on his lap. I don't know why Costa has white linen pants, because I doubt that Hoover actually worked in white linen pants, but nonetheless, it makes for a fun portrait, though. Dwight Eisenhower, after all those, let's face it, after all those years of FDR and Harry Truman, Eisenhower became a big fan, or big favorite of the League House itself. And actually, because he retired to Gettysburg and was so close to Philadelphia, where he'd come many, many times during his presidency, we actually have a suite of rooms, or had a suite of rooms on the 4th floor called the Eisenhower Suite. He was here that often. And of course, Richard Nixon in the far left-hand corner. And Nixon was here as late as March of 1988, giving a preliminary speech before he made his, shall we say, his political comeback in a way. Ronald Reagan, portrait commissioned by the Union League, painted from life at his ranch in Simi, California, but he never came to the League as a president, unfortunately. So he's not one of the 14. But we have Gerald Ford, we have George H.W. Bush, and both of these men were here as president. Ford to receive the gold medal in 1979, and Bush to unveil his portrait in Lincoln Hall. Great night. And then the last portrait we have is that of George W. Bush, and he was the last sitting president to visit the League on Saturday, December the 6th of 2008. It was towards the end of his presidency. He wanted to see his last Army-Navy game here in Philadelphia, but before he did that, he stopped by the League in the morning, and in a Lincoln Hall packed with 900 members, just packed in there like sardines, George W. Bush unveiled this life portrait commissioned by the League itself. So there you go. Now, I'm hoping that all of you were able to guess who we were looking at before I had to tell you, at least I hope. But I also hope you enjoyed a little bit of the story about why these portraits are here and why they're all Republican. So now keep in mind that Henry Charles Carey's economic theories were being used in the American economy up into the 1970s. They were that good, and people believed in them that much. So who would have thought that by walking into a room like this with all these portraits, you'd get a history lesson beyond just American presidential portraiture. So, well, I hope you enjoyed it, though, because, again, it shows another interesting link between the Union League, Philadelphia history, American history, and American presidential history at the same time. So thanks for watching. We really do appreciate your patronage, if you will, for these videos. We hope you're enjoying them. We'll keep doing them. And it's almost the end of summer, so enjoy what's left of your summer. Labor Day will be upon us, and we all get back to work, right? So on that note, thank you again for watching, and have a good summer. Bye now.